Welcome to the Hasn't Been 3 Days podcast with your hosts, Justin and BJ. We talk about 3-day-old news, sports, and whatever else we want to talk about. You, the MVP listener, you listen in, you laugh, you might cry. You can enjoy our takes, you can hate on our takes, but just don't let us know unless it's been 3 days. So here we are again. We're in the middle of, or in the beginning of, I don't know, whatever we're at, of season 3.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's the middle of the first part of the conversations. I don't know. We are.
Well, we might just get through this first set of the parts and be like, no, let's just go back to the old way and figure this out. But we're going to finish this. It's been good. And we're in the first part of the part series and talking about church hurt. But before we get into our next guest, Justin, let's just catch up a little bit. How have you been the last few days?
Well, been good. It's been busy. September is birthday month for the Rabels. We have everybody's birthdays in September. Well, at the end of August, Brenton's birthday, and then it's my dad's, and then it's Bree's and Natalie's and Wilson's, and just everybody's birthdays under the sun.
Like a month-long celebration.
Taylor's birthday, yeah, it's just everybody's birthday is in this month. So we've had a lot of, we'll have a lot of birthday celebrations. We just had a birthday celebration for Bree and my niece Natalie, who's going to be 19. So we did that this weekend, and the weekend before it was Dad's birthday, so we celebrated. He's my favorite father. Yeah. I think that's how that goes. I think that's what me and Nate joked about. It's just like, hey, Dad, you're our favorite now. So Dad, and then Nate and Wilson came up over last weekend and brought Wilson to their first Husker football game and under the lights at Memorial Stadium. So that was fun. So we had a good long weekend of that. So
awesome. That's cool.
Yeah. And then Bree turns, by the time this episode comes out, she'll be 2 days away from her 16th birthday. So
yeah, she'll be driving and be a good time.
Well, let's hope. Yeah, and then Brenton's football game. His team is now 2-1 now. So we're starting out good. So what about you? What you got going on?
Well, it's been a crazy week. A lot personally has gone on in the last few weeks, and so that's been a struggle. But we're getting through it. We joke that we just need to get back on our feet, but we can't get back on our feet if we get up to our knees and keep getting taken out. So, but yeah, this weekend, the Camry took her last breath.
Yeah,
and so that's been a fun, not really fun
trying to figure out vehicle options.
Yeah, so for those of you listening that don't know the situation, Justin and Becky had helped get me on my feet with a car situation after the divorce, and it was a good deal, $1,000 car, and 1996 Toyota Camry with about 303,000 miles at the time. So some people would say about half of its life. Still had another 3 to go, but she made it 315,000 miles, and this weekend she blew something and smoked and said, "I'm done." So
it's because you didn't put oil in it.
No, that wasn't it. But
okay,
yeah,
I don't know.
So
you got it home, didn't you?
We got her home. She's in the driveway crooked, and so we got to fix that and try to get her towed off of here and somewhere else. So, but yeah, if anybody knows anything about wants a car for parts, or if they know of any good deals on cars, they want to hook a brother up and give him some good luck, that'd be great. So,
yes, if you were closer, I'd just let you borrow one of my cars. Thought about it. I was like, that's a long drive.
Yeah.
I can't really meet you halfway. What would halfway be? See, 23 hours.
Probably Estes Park.
You think it would be?
Oh, it's 23 total for you?
I think Lincoln to there is 23 hours, I think.
So you'd be getting into maybe Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Utah. Ugh.
Yeah.
Just
Anyway.
bad news there this week. Oh,
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah. We talked about briefly touching on this. I don't know about you. This is something that we're in the topic of hurt. And I don't usually, I told my daughter this, we were talking about this and everything that went down with Charlie Kirk and the stabbing in North Carolina and the shootings, the different school shootings, and just the sheer evil this week that's taken place. And normally I don't get wrapped up in the news and social media stuff. And I decided to go and explore when everything happened. And it has made me sick, physically sick to my stomach this week. And then, emotional watching some of the replays and seeing all of the kids that were there. And man, it's kind of wrecked me a little bit. And I wasn't even a big follower of him. He was a great influencer. That was a good term that my dad used this week to describe him. But I just didn't follow him. That I wasn't like a disciple or anything like that. But just sheer evil.
There was probably plenty of times where you saw, just like I did, and I wasn't a follower either. It's not like I followed him on social media or, tried to go to one of his events if it was close by or anything. But, yeah, you would see him on social media, all the clips of just debating and allowing people to have a platform no matter who they were. And yeah, it's just when someone's life is taken, no matter what, and then the hate that comes out of it.
Yeah.
When half of them, I would say 99% of the people didn't actually know him or know the person that died. They just, it's their opinion of the person and how they see it from afar.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that we need to get too far into this.
Yeah.
There was a couple times I would go and try to listen to the other side. I listened to a couple people that didn't like him talk about what happened. And these are the kind of events that can unite us.
Mm-hmm.
And people talked about how he brought division, and it depends on what clips you're watching and how they've been edited and whatnot. But I don't think he brought division. He brought a voice to people and gave them a platform, like you just said. But the division comes when you do something like this. When you cheer the death of somebody, and now that when you watch the aftermath now, what makes me sick now is watching these people say, oh, the conspiracy theory stuff. And it's like, oh, this was fake and this was fake and that was fake. No, here's the fact. He's dead.
Mm-hmm.
He was murdered in cold-blooded murder.
Mm-hmm.
And now 2 kids don't have their dad and a wife doesn't have her husband. He's gone. Don't sit here and try to conspiracy theory. He's not really dead. You're going to see all this stuff that's happened. No, he's gone. He's gone. And a life taken too soon. And all because somebody didn't like his opinions and didn't like what he was doing. Come on.
Yeah, and you're right. I have gone out there. I'm with you. I like reading and seeing the other side, both sides from everything. There's plenty of stuff that I went through on social media as you just kind of go down the rabbit hole. But a few days later, when people from this news agency and this news agency or this podcast, they're just like, I'm not a follower. I'm not religious, but I respected the guy. I'm an atheist, but he gave us a platform to have a conversation and never lashed out. There might have been times where he might have lashed out or whatever, but all the stuff I ever saw, you can say it's factual or whatever. How people say that? Well, you didn't like it because, he always came with being very. What I appreciated with him is it seems like he did his homework on things, no matter what topic it was. Like literally, the guy knew so much stuff, and that's from him just studying things.
Yeah.
But
anyway. And he's been doing it a long time, and there's times when you're getting a heated discussion, you're going to interrupt each other.
31.
31 years old.
Yeah.
He started when he was 18. It's crazy, and yet the one guy that I saw that wasn't a supporter And it was he was a African-American man he goes, I didn't agree with most of what he said, but he goes, here's the thing. He was not threatening anybody's life. He was not threatening their livelihood or their safety or their home or their food. He wasn't endangering any of that. He wasn't even infringing on any of their rights. And somebody just got so irritated with him that they had to take him out. He goes, this is just sheer evil. And I thought, that's what can unite us when we don't agree with somebody, but we can come together and say, you know what, this guy that killed him was an idiot and wrong, complete evil.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Agreed.
yeah. Rest in peace, and blessings to his kids and his wife. And I hope and pray that they can find peace during all of this. But yeah, already the influence for Turning Point, there's already immense support. Schools and organizations reaching out to start little chapters on there. It's already been incredible. So yeah.
I think one of the other, he knew, somebody asked him about his security. One of the things that I went down the rabbit hole is, somebody asked him in an interview about security. Yeah, he has security guards. I get threatened every day. But he's like, this is where the people are at, though. He knew, that's not saying he knew that he was putting himself out there, and he didn't care because he knew what he stood for.
Yeah.
He knew faithfully that he was living out what he thought he should be doing. So,
right.
And what the... Anyways.
And yeah, just again, more sheer evil. The stabbing, if you saw that clip and video, that was disgusting as well. And it's just gross. I think if anything, and we're going to get into this with our next guest in the next couple episodes, but if anything, when we see something we can do something about, we need to do our best to make this world better, bottom line. And whether it's your job, whether it's your family, make things better than you found them, So anyway, yeah.
Definitely.
Yep. Appreciate the little insight there and the catch up, but let's jump back into what we're going through. And we're talking about church hurt over these last few weeks. And we've heard some great stories from some great people. And we have another story for you over these next couple of episodes. It's going to be in two parts. I just want to introduce what's going on here. We're going to talk to Deandra Miller. Heidi and I did an interview with Deandra, and so we were glad to have her back on. Deandra, if you remember, was on with us talking about the WNBA. And so one of our most popular episodes and guests. So we brought her back, and we joke that we could have content for days with Deandra. She's awesome to talk to. But we're going to hear her story. She's got quite a few stories actually of church hurt. And so we just want to introduce you all to Deandra Miller once again, and listen to this interview that we had with Deandra. It's a good time, and maybe you can relate. If you can, let us know. If you want to share your story with us, we'd love to hear it. 3dayoldpodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on socials and find us, direct message us. We would love to hear your story and give you a sounding board. So
we'll bring the episode.
There you go.
You guys don't even get to listen to me ask questions. It's probably going to be the highest rated episode.
No,
that's because Deandra's on.
Yep, she does a good job. But everybody, take some time, enjoy, and let's welcome Deandra Miller once again. Well, we're going to continue our series as we interview some people and hear some stories on just people's experiences with church hurt. And this week we're pleased and honored to join a past guest once again that wants to share, that's willing to share some of her stories with church hurt. And so tonight we've got the privilege of having Deandra Miller with us once again. So Deandra, welcome again. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm tired. I slept about 4 hours last night. So, not making good life choices there.
The life that you live is one that we all get to watch the highlights of, and that's, I can see why you don't sleep much. So.
I hopefully now we're going into a season of a little bit more sleep. So
good. Well, again, thanks for joining us on a different topic.
Yeah.
than sports and basketball and all this stuff. But one of the things that we've talked to our guests about in this season is just we kind of have generally and very vaguely defined the term church hurt. And I'm not going to ask you to define it. If you want to, you can. But what we've defined it as is hurt that happens within the confines or the makeup of organized church by either people, situations, sometimes polity, whatever the case may be, that causes us to just have our expectations not met. That's caused us some pain and some hurt for various reasons. So we're just in this part of the season, we're just trying to hear some stories, and I just really appreciate you coming on to give a little bit of background. Why don't you tell us, when did you start going to church? How were you introduced to church? How did faith become important to you? Clear back to when it all started.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember a time that I wasn't in church. I don't think there was a time that I wasn't in church. My dad was a pastor. And so we joke all the time that I was born in the middle of Wednesday night Bible study. I quite literally, I mean, my mom went to a hospital, but it happened like during the time of Wednesday night Bible study. And, and I was an only child, and I grew up, I was at the church all the time. That was a time, I feel like it's shifted a little bit maybe now, but I feel like when we were kids, it was like you were in church like Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night, Saturday sometimes, and then back again. Like we spent so much time there. And so I also remember being a kid, and like, even when we were on vacation, like my dad would find a church and we'd go to church. And so there was just I don't remember a time, and I don't think there was a time when as a kid that I wasn't. I think probably as soon as I was big enough to be in a church, I was in a church.
Yeah. No, that said, my story was I was born in the middle of a revival. So yeah, I get it exactly. So as a kid growing up in the parsonage, if it was a parsonage, or in the church home, whatever you want to call it, did the church, because you were there so often as a child, did it become your playground, if you will, as well?
It's so funny because when I was 4, we moved to Oregon. We had been in Washington. We moved to Oregon. And during that time, my dad was responsible. He didn't obviously do it by hand, but was responsible for building a new church. And the parsonage was on the same property. So we built the house and the church. And it's like the house was right at the street. And then you go up a driveway and a parking lot, and there was the church. So it was right there. And I remember being a kid and taking the keys to the church and like going in with my roller skates and like a roller, because we had that carpet that was really thin over cement. It was really nice and hard. So it was like you weren't flying too fast on the roller skates because it wasn't cement, but you weren't like, it was good for that. And so I would go up there when no one was there and just roller skate around. So it was quite literally like a playground. Like it was, I mean, I was in that building frequently or around the building. And so it was just a very, very normal part of my childhood being there at the church. And we were there at that church and in that house and on that property until the middle of my freshman year of high school. So, all my young years were around that building. So
okay,
yeah, that was quite literally the playground.
Right. I remember just raising kids in the church as well. And I would tell our boards and such that this not only is their church, but because we're here so often, this is their playground. Please extend grace to them. We'll be respectful and all the things. But you kind of led me to my next question. With your dad being a pastor, you going through that lifestyle, that way of life, how many different churches would you say from your formative years did you grow up in? Would you say was consistent, and then, let's start there.
Yeah, there were technically would be 4, I believe, but the first one, I was 4 years old when we moved away, so I don't remember it at all. The second one was the biggest one. We were in Oregon, Southern Oregon, and we moved there when I was 4, and we moved away the middle of my freshman year of high school to another town that was about 3 hours away in Oregon. And we were in that town only a year and a half. So the second half of my freshman year, all of my sophomore year, and then the summer before my junior year of high school, we moved to Southern California. And we were in Southern California then. We're still here, but my dad was then at that church until I was an adult, and he became a district superintendent at that point. So 4, but I only remember 3 of them. The one when I was a baby, I don't remember anything about that. In fact, I have very weird, inaccurate memories of that because, you don't remember things accurately. But so 3, there would be 3 that were pretty significant and consistent.
Okay. And then last time we talked to you, you had mentioned a little bit about your history in the church as far as jobs and different things like that. Mm-hmm. As an adult going into the church after being raised in the church, tell us a little bit about your history in ministry as well, and not in a sense that it was required because you were related, but also that you chose to do that. Tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to note actually on that note is my dad was very, very good about separating me and my mom from his job, in the sense that when he would take on a church, he was very clear about the fact that he was there. He was the pastor they were hiring. And just because I was his daughter and she was his wife did not mean that was our job, or that we held responsibilities, or even for me as a child, that I was not to be held to some other standard than anyone else just because I was his kid. And that's something that I really, really appreciated about my dad, and something that as an adult, when I was doing ministry, and then later when I had children who were involved in that, I kept that in mind. And I think that was a crucial, that was the way he did things heavily formed how I did things, and also how I, a lot of how I viewed the relationship with the church. And, he just was always really, really good about that. Obviously we were involved as much as my mom and I both were involved as much as we wanted to be. And we both were involved, but it was never, well, you're the pastor's wife or you're the pastor's daughter, so this is your job, as assigned by expectations of people in the church. It was always, and my dad and my family, it was always very much, where do you feel like your skills and your passions and things lie? This doesn't have to be just because you're, the pastor's daughter, you don't have to do this specific thing, or the pastor's wife, you have to do this specific thing. It was very much, where do you want to be a part of things? So I was a good kid. I was involved. I wanted to be involved. I was at everything as a kid, and then as a teenager. And when I was 17, we lost our youth pastor. That sounds so dramatic. They didn't die, but we didn't have a youth pastor.
Yeah, to clarify.
Yeah, to clarify. And so I kind of stepped in and started volunteering with the junior high kids and helping out with the junior high kids. And I loved it, and I loved them. And then I turned 18. I graduated from high school, and we still didn't have anybody. And so I was set to go to Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego in the fall. But I started working at the church on staff as an 18-year-old kid. Took the kids to summer camp and all that stuff as a staff member. And we only lived about an hour and a half from Point Loma. And so I went to school, but I scheduled my classes so that I had the majority of my classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I would drive down to San Diego on Monday. I'd be there for class Tuesday. I'd drive back home Wednesday morning. I'd run youth group Wednesday night. Then after youth group, I'd drive back to the school Wednesday night. I'd be there for classes on Thursday. And then I'd come back either Friday or Saturday, depending on what events we had going on, and be there for the weekend, and then drive back again on Monday and start it all over. And I did that and stayed as the youth pastor on staff there for my freshman and sophomore year. And then after that, I decided that I needed to make a decision. I either needed to commit and stay at Point Loma and be there and be a college student and do my classes and whatever, or I needed to leave and I needed to move back home and work at the church full time and do that. And that's what I chose to do. I left Point Loma and I came back and I worked at the church, and I continued working there full time as the youth pastor until I was 26, I believe, which is a pretty solid run for a youth pastor, or any pastor for that matter, especially when you start at 17. I made it, almost a decade at that church, that I worked as the youth pastor there with my dad. It was my dad's church, so I got to work on staff with my dad. So then when I left ministry, I'm skipping over a lot here. There's several things that happened in there, but let's see, how's the best way to do this? Maybe I need to back up and not skip over all the things. So when I left Point Loma and I came back to the church, I also got married, and I married somebody who was heavily involved. He was not a pastor, but he was heavily involved in the church. He was the worship leader. And it was a very short marriage. I would like to say this is where the church hurt started. It's not. There was stuff that happened before that when I was even a kid that we can get into if you want to. But we got married. We were married for about 3 years. He was abusive. I didn't know that when we got married. I didn't know that he was going to be that. He did a really good job of convincing me he was someone he wasn't. And no one knew. I hid it. I kept it quiet. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't really totally understand what I was experiencing. And so he continued to be involved in the church. I continued to be on staff at the church. He used to use that as kind of a threat. Well, if you tell anybody, they're not going to let you be on staff there anymore. And so it finally got to a point where we did get divorced. And I was thankfully able to continue in ministry.
Let me pause you right there.
Yeah.
Because I want to dive into that a little bit more in depth, but I want to go back before we jump into that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Before we get to that's a lot right there. Thank you for sharing that.
I was going to say, listen, I've got loads of
content for days.
Content for days. I love that. Thank you. But I want to go back to, and partly because Justin and I say this all the time, it's our podcast. We can talk about whatever we want. But as I tell Heidi sometimes, there's times that I don't want to share all of my transparency on this platform just because I don't feel like I have a story to tell. But anyway, I want to hear some of yours because we have a similar story. So I want to hear, before you got married, before you were leaving Point Loma and making that decision, as a parsonage kid.
Yeah.
Was there anything that happened in the churches that you remember that caused you to be like, wait a minute, is this Jesus, or is this how this is going to be, where you just kind of hit pause in your own understanding? Was there anything that happened in your growing up years, in your formative years, where you're just like, really, this is coming from the church people?
Yeah, there was, yes, there was. But it was later on. I think as a child, my parents did a really good job of, I would say I was sheltered to a point, but it wasn't, they were protected. It was age appropriate. My parents were really cautious about, because I think especially when you're a pastor's kid, there's meetings happening and there's things going on and there's conversations. And I feel like a lot of times you are privy to things you shouldn't be. And you see behind a curtain that really is not appropriate for a kid a lot of times. And I didn't. My parents did a really good job of keeping me away from that and just letting me be a kid and just letting me grow up with normal kid stuff. But when we left the church that I had known my whole life, and moved 3 hours away to this small church. And during that time, I was a freshman in high school when we got there, and we were only there about a year and a half. And the church grew exponentially in that time. But it was fast growth, and the way that the Nazarene Church works, in order to be part of the decision making of a church, you have to become a member, and be able to vote and things like that. Well, when churches are growing fast like that, you end up with a bunch of people that haven't done the things to become members, because that's not really the priority. Like when you're part of a church, you're part of a church, whether you're officially a member or not. You're a functioning member of the church. And so this church had grown, and a lot of the people that were in it weren't members, and a lot of people that were still members of this church, there had been some drama before my dad got there, and so a lot of people had left and they weren't there anymore. Some of them had moved away. It just, all these things. Well, some stuff happened in the church. I don't remember a lot of the details of it, but there were things that from what I can remember, because again, my parents did a good job of keeping me out of things. But from what I can remember, there were things that the church board wanted my dad to do as the pastor. And my dad, being who he is, never did anything just because people wanted him to. He would always stop, pray, consider, look at the situation, whatever, and evaluate based off what he felt like was the right thing and what he, felt like God was telling him to do. And these were things he felt like weren't the right thing to do. And so he didn't. And it made people mad. And so there was a small group of people who essentially decided they didn't want him there anymore. And they came after him and they tried to get him to resign. And my dad, later on, as we've talked through this over the years, tells me that he wanted to. Because if you know anything about how the church functions and how things work, for a pastor to resign and move on to a different church is not a big deal. That stuff happens all the time. But for a pastor to be removed from his church is a big deal. And so my dad, every part of him is like, okay, yeah, I would like to do that. But he felt like God telling him, no, you need to stay. And so he said, no, I'm not going to resign. And what ended up happening was these people they called for a vote against my dad. Well, now the majority of this church that we're in is no longer, they haven't become members. They can't vote. There's nothing they can do. And those people also started bringing people in who didn't even know our family, who didn't know my dad, who hadn't ever been at the church, just to vote with them. In the process of this, they were spreading lies. And it was a very small town, one high school, and, just a small town. And so lies were being spread about my family, things that I knew even as a kid, because there were things that were being said about how my dad was with my family. And I knew that wasn't true. So I was watching this all unravel from, people within our church, and they called for a vote and they voted him out. And I remember distinctly, I don't remember a lot because, again, my parents were protective and I wasn't there the day that they did the vote. My mom made sure I wasn't there. They kept me out of it. But I remember distinctly going to school in this small town after this had happened, and people saying things to me like, what did your dad do that was so bad that his own church doesn't want him? And things like that as a, freshman, so I guess I was a sophomore at that point, a sophomore in high school, I did not understand. And for me and my perspective, I had watched my dad from inside our home, being who he was in our home. He was consistently who he was. Who he was at home behind closed doors is who he was in the church. And my dad, to this day, is one of the best human beings that I know. He's someone who, lives his life purposefully, and he is cautious about the decisions he makes and how they will impact the people around him. He prays about his decisions. He makes decisions he feels like God wants him to make. But then at the same point, he has so much grace for the people around him. He has high expectations of himself and how he lives his life, and the way that the standard he holds himself to. But he does not expect that from he has grace for people around him. And I think that that's something that, I think that's how it should be, but I think it's very rare. And so I'm watching this unfold, and I'm watching my parents be hurt. I'm watching my dad lose his job. I'm watching them worry about, what do we do now? I'm watching this all unfold as this, 15-year-old kid. And I was angry. I was angry at the people who I thought were our friends. When you're in a church, these people become like your family. And they were people that I thought, they're people who sat at our dinner table, or, well, we probably sat at theirs because my mom didn't really cook, but the people we shared meals with, and people whose kids I was good friends with, that I spent time at their houses and they spent time at my house. And, we went to birthday parties and whatever. And these people that were part of my life that just didn't care about us anymore. I was mad at them. I was mad at God, because in my 15-year-old brain, I could not understand how someone like my dad would do everything he was supposed to do and do everything, quote unquote, correctly. Mm-hmm. And God would let something like this happen. Yeah. I couldn't understand it. I could not understand it. In my head, my dad had been called to this church. From this church, we'd been very happy at the church we were at before. We could have stayed there and stayed perfectly happy and healthy and, off in our little world. And we hadn't. We'd come here because my dad felt like God had called him here. And then for this to happen, it just rocked my entire world. And I was angry and I was sad, and that was the one time in my life that I was a little bit rebellious. I had like a month of being rebellious, and then I ended up just telling my parents about it because I felt bad. And so the reason that I chose to be rebellious was not because, I wanted to do those things. It was because I was basically saying F you to God. Like, I was so mad at God that I didn't want anything to do with it. I just was angry. I was angry.
From your understanding as a 15-year-old teenager going through not only just the change and the trauma of moving in the middle of your freshman year. I mean, I've been there. I know that deal as well. I put my kids through it as well. But then you're dealing with everything you just said, and you're faced with that. You now work in an industry where you deal with famous people all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But from the Nazarene world, being a pastor's kid and being in the fishbowl of the Nazarene world, can you see, or can you talk to some of the correlation that caused some of that hurt? Because you became a public figure in that little town because your dad was the pastor of that church.
Yeah.
And that leads to some of those hurts. I know, having those conversations with my kids, it was, you're not only, and this is not fair. This is not fair to our kids. It's not fair to us when we went through it. It's not fair to our parents as pastors as well, but it's reality of the world we live in. It's like, you're not only representing God and your faith personally, you're representing your family. Now you're representing the church. And there's so much pressure that can be added onto this. Maybe it's self-inflicted. Maybe it's not. I know it's not fair, but it happens. Did you feel like that was a factor at all because just of the environment of the church world that you were living in?
I didn't. I really didn't. I never felt that. And again, that's props to my family. That's props to my parents, because they really ingrained not only in the people around me, but also in me that, this was who my dad was and what he did for a living was not about me or what, I wasn't I was taught from a time that I was very young that what the things I said and did and the actions that I chose were not about, it wasn't about, my parents or the church. It was, are you doing the things that are right and good? Are you making, it doesn't matter if you're a pastor's kid. It doesn't matter how it looks to anybody. None of this is about appearance. This is about your heart and your relationship with God and you loving people well. That's what it was about. And so for me, I think because my parents raised me that way, it was never about appearances. It was never about, my parents never cared what people thought on that level. It was never about, well, we need to make sure everything looks right. And it was never that. It was just very much, do you love God? And are you loving people well? And if you do those two things, nothing else matters. And I grew up, my dad nailed that into my brain that, you love God and you love people, and that's it. Everything else is secondary. And I think when that stuff happened, I think that's part of why because I wasn't angry at I was hurt for my parents. And I think I had felt the pressure to, be a certain type of way for them. First of all, especially now as an adult and as a parent, I would never want my kid to feel that kind of pressure, to have some, for me. And so I think if I had felt that, though, being the kind of kid I was, I probably I wouldn't have, well, for one, I wouldn't have had my month of rebellion, but I would not, I wouldn't have wanted to make my parents look bad or whatever. But that wasn't even a thought. What people thought wasn't even a thought for me.
And I just want to be clear. I know what I said. That's self-imposed pressure.
Oh, but to that, I think that I didn't have that because my parents so heavily counteracted that as a kid. I don't think they wanted me to feel that. And so I think that they purposely did things so that I didn't. I really didn't feel, I mean, I was hurt. I was hurt by the things that people said, and I didn't like that people were saying the things that they said, but I didn't feel like that was because of me or that I had to be a certain way because of it.
Yeah, no, I'm saying I think you acted the way you did because of how you were raised, not because of your status in the church. And that's kudos to your parents and kudos to you for how you, and I would say the same thing for me. I just want to be clear because I know my dad's listening to this. I didn't feel that same pressure either, but I put it on myself at times to love people well and to be the person that I knew God was calling me to be. So I want to be clear that I'm not saying your dad or your mom put that pressure on you, but we wanted to act accordingly because of how we were raised, not because of our dad's position in the church. So thank you for sharing that. But that does lead us to that next place. That's a hurt that was polity, people, I mean, all the things. Now you get into the church, you're in ministry, you're a youth pastor, you get married to somebody who's involved, somebody who's in ministry as well. Abuse begins to take place. We pick back up to this part of the story. You mentioned then you go through divorce. Tell me how the church hurt plays in this scenario for you in this marriage.
This one was brutal. I mean, all of it. It's brutal. But this one, I think I had just turned 20, like a couple weeks before he and I got married. I turned 20, a couple weeks before we got married. And so by the time I was getting divorced, I was 23. I was a baby. And I was trying to, and not only am I now going through a divorce publicly in front of the church, essentially because of my position, but also I'm dealing with the aftermath of having been in abuse and no one knowing that was going on and having to come out of that. So, I remember my mom when I moved, because I moved back home with my parents as this was happening. And I remember my mom saying after the fact that they thought I was gone. They thought who I was gone. She said, you were just a shell of yourself. And she said, we just didn't even recognize you anymore. And we weren't sure we were going to get you back. And so there was so much damage to, that someone goes through in a situation like that, that I was also dealing on top of everything else. I was dealing with that. And so when this was all going on, I just chose to be quiet. I didn't go around and tell my side of things. I didn't defend myself, really. I just stayed quiet. And he went out and just ran his mouth to anyone who would listen. And because of that, because he was out there saying things and lies, I mean, he was not even accurately portraying what had happened. He was saying things that weren't true. And because he was doing that, there were a lot of people who believed him. And frankly, I think on some level, I get that because that's all you're hearing. And so it's like, well, no one else is saying anything, so I'm not going to believe differently. I think that was hurtful to me because I think on some level you expect people, again, these are people who, I was 23 at this point. We'd been at that church since I was 16. A lot of these people I had worked with their children. Like I had, been their kids' youth pastor and I'd grown up in that church. And but I think one of the parts that was the most hurtful for me was realizing that, again, people I cared about, people I loved, people who knew who I was would believe these things about me that were not true. And it was complicated by the fact that my dad was the pastor. And so my dad had just made the decision that there were other people who could fill the role as pastor in this situation, but no one else could be my dad. And so he called the district superintendent and said, I need you to step in here. I need you to take over in this aspect. I need to be able to just be her dad. And so the district superintendent is the one that I went in and told everything to, and basically had to plead my case of whether I could continue in ministry and file for divorce or not. And he was the one that kind of dealt with that. And my dad was just my dad. But it got to a point where the guy was saying so much so publicly that my dad had to get up and address it from the platform and just say, like, hey, like, this needs to stop. This is where, and just gave very basic info. I mean, not even the details of anything, basically just, you know, she's dealing with this with the district superintendent. Everything's being done the right way, blah, 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 blah. And, but it was hard, you know, it was hard to watch those relationships shift. And I think it's already a hard shift to go from being a teenager in a church to then being in a position of leadership, because you're dealing with people who were adults when you were a kid and they saw you as a kid. And so they have a hard time transitioning to seeing you as an adult. But then on top of that, now I'm dealing with, you know, all of this extra added stuff. And so I really kind of reclused. And is that a word? Reclused?
It is now. You have made it right now.
I don't know if it's
100%.
past tense, reclused.
It is. Go with it.
Own it like it is. You just say it.
So I really withdrew. That's the word I was looking for. I really withdrew and just kind of kept to myself. And it really was never the same for me there. And I struggled at that church after the fact. And there were, even to this day, because we still live in the same area, I actually still live in the same city. And so those people are still in my, you know, the Nazarene Church is a small world. You still see the same people. To this day, there are people that I wonder what they think and I wonder what they believed. I've gotten to a point now in my life where I just don't care. But, you know, that it's, what's that?
That's a hard point to get to.
It really is. It really is.
Were you attending the church the whole time that was happening, or did you stop? Yeah. Okay.
That's because I was on staff. I was still working at the church the whole time this was happening. So it was definitely just watching that happen was rough.
First of all, I first want to just say I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you went through the abuse and the poor quality of what marriage. I mean, we could go down a rabbit trail here, but I'm just sorry. And I don't say that to you as a pity. Sorry. No, I mean, I genuinely can. But I also want to just say you're hurt and being abused and going through and living in an abusive relationship technically has nothing to do with the church.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
That people go through that and are dealing with that. Like I think Heidi said it best a couple of weeks ago. She said, just because everybody has a specific story, and it's
just because our story is unique, but it's unfortunately not uncommon.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's people that are in abusive marriages and abusive relationships all over, inside and outside the church. Mm-hmm. And you alluded to it. Thank you for sharing. The hurt was emphasized by the way the church people were handling your not so uncommon situation, unfortunately. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, Deandra, too, because of your past in the church, I think the church is ill-equipped to deal with some of the hardest issues that we deal with in life. Yep. What would you say?
Ooh, she's going to get fired up.
Heidi and I have this conversation frequently.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think we talk all the time about the fact that, and also I tend to get, like, when I start going off on these things, please stop me if you need to, because I will get long-winded. But I think...
Content for days.
So we're good. It's a good thing me and Heidi do Marco Polo in the car because there's a destination. Otherwise, they'd probably be 4 hours long. Yes. But I think one of the things you hear, or I feel like people in general hear frequently in the church is churches are imperfect. They're made up of people and people are imperfect. And so you're supposed to just kind of give grace to this because, people are imperfect. Okay, yes, this is true.
Ideally.
Well, even not ideally. Ideally, the church would be perfect, but it's not. It's just not.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that's really frustrating is we live in a time, where culture has dramatically shifted. Even if you look at the culture right now versus 10 years ago, it's so dramatically different. And divorce is so much more common than it ever was in the past. And look, we can get into the semantics of that and whether, we should be doing this or that so that divorces don't happen, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. But they do. They do happen. And they're going to continue to happen. And so for me, it's like as a church, you can either continue to, my thing is, okay, I got to back up. I'm going to come back to where I was right there. But my thing is you have to look at the purpose of the church. If you're looking at the purpose of the purpose of the church is not a group of people to one up each other with how perfect their lives are and how well they're doing and how much they are being Christian. That's not the purpose of a church, but that's what it often becomes. The purpose of church to me is for people who are hurting, who are broken, who need support, who don't have other people in their lives, who are not accepted in other places. The church is supposed to be a place of love and of acceptance and of kindness and grace. And so to me, when you go through it, and you guys know this because you've both been through it, going through a divorce is probably the lowest I have been in my life. And it was the point at which I needed people the most. I needed love. I needed support, especially because in my situation, I was essentially walking away from my entire life. I walked away because he was now we're getting into the second divorce. I forgot we were still talking about the first one, but spoiler alert for everyone who's listening to this. There were two. But if you're walking away from anything, and even if you're not, even if you're staying within the church you're at, you're losing the life that you as you know it. And not only that, but you're losing the future you thought you had, and you're losing someone who you thought was your support, who you thought was supposed to be your best friend and your person, and that was supposed to be a consistent, solid thing in your life, and now it's just gone, and you're left to pick up these pieces, and you need that support. And in a time where the church should surround you and support you and lift you up, and it's not about like, hey, you shouldn't have gotten a divorce. No one wants to get a divorce. Like, that's, nobody gets married thinking, what's going to be great about this marriage when we get divorced. That's
right.
Nobody. I have said that same thing. Nobody's thinking that, and
no one is thinking that.
No, and so I think when you're at that point and you're, that's not the time for people to be like, divorce really isn't. Yeah, Susan, I know. Sorry for anyone whose name is Susan, but
Sorry.
I know, I know that this wasn't my plan either. This isn't what I wanted, but here we are, and I'm hurting. So are you going to stand over the top of me and point your finger at me and tell me about how this isn't God's will? Or are you going to lift me up and support me and walk with me? And the problem is that within the church, people get so caught up in this pretty picture and everything being perfect that they forget about the function of the church and what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to look like. And so these people that this is your time to shine, church. Pick them up, help them out, walk with them. Like this should be where you shine. No. And I
think my theory with that too has been that I think people, there's a combination of things, but I think that what I have experienced, I won't speak for you. My experience has been that people are afraid. They are afraid to sit in it because they're afraid that they're going to somehow condone something that Jesus is forbidding, and that they're going to say, in sitting with you in your mess, that they're going to somehow say, this is okay. And it's going to be, and that they're allowing something in that is not okay, forgetting completely that it's about the person and loving people well, regardless of the situation or circumstances. People don't know how, and they're afraid of their own things coming out, their own things being highlighted. And so sitting with other people's things, it's like, well, if I get too close to that mess, then it looks like I'm associated with that or condoning it, yeah. Or I don't know what to say.
And yeah. I think it's I think it's different when we talked about this just recently, when somebody goes through losing somebody in a death, and we talk about all the insensitive things we say to people, and we think we're doing it in the name of Jesus, right? It's like, oh, they're better off, or, oh, they're in a good place. We know where they're at. All those things that we say that we think we're doing a good service, but really it's not doing anything good. But I've sat with board members of churches I've pastored that say, Pastor, we need to sit and get dirty with these people. And I'm like, great, let's do it. How dirty do you want to get? And as soon as I ask that question, that's the first question I always ask. How dirty do you want to get? People don't know how to answer that, because we want to give money, or we want to give a token experience, or maybe this will help heal them, or maybe this can help fix them, or maybe I can just be a friend. But then once there's some shade put on it, or there's a little bit more mud than they realize, they're out. And we don't teach, we don't train in the church how to properly deal with hurt and grief and be able to help people when they need love and grace. They don't need to be condemned, or they don't need to have you side with them or give you acceptance of your actions, but they need you just to give grace and love and be Jesus in those moments.
I think I just said to you the other night too, we were talking about condemnation, how it talks about there's no condemnation found in Christ, right? And that's true. When you are found in Christ, you're seeking him out. It doesn't matter. You come to him, you're repentant. There is no condemnation found in him. And that's true. And you can know that in your head and in your heart. The problem is when you exist in a church and you go through something like this, there is condemnation found with people. And so you can know that. It can be true. You can exist in that, but people are still people, and they will hand that condemnation to you. It will hang over you. You can stay in the same place that you've been, and you will have to live and exist within other people's condemnation, and they will make sure you know it. Yeah, that is so. Even though that's true, biblically, that's true. There's no condemnation found in him. People make sure that you feel the weight of that, of their condemnation.
Yeah. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, in that being true, and we all agree with that statement, is that similarly to what you found, Deandra, in your story, that in good intentions can still lead to some hurt in these places?
Yeah, I mean, I think since we've spoiled it now, and there are two divorces, I had two very different experiences. And I think with the first one, there was hurt there, but I think overall people tried. I just don't think they knew what to do. And I think that's, Heidi, kind of what you were saying. It's like, and BJ, you too kind of said this. And one of the things that just even now, even when you were saying that blows my mind, that I always kind of cling to, is like, why do we have to teach people how to like sit with this? Like, if you've read any part of the Bible, or you have any understanding of who Jesus was, and the whole concept, again, we're talking about Christianity, the whole point of a church, the whole point of Christianity, essentially, short of like, the Jesus part, is loving people. And so, and I mean, again, like, we go right back to the basics of who Jesus was and how he treated people and the people he sat with. And it's like, why do we have to, as a church, say, hey, you know what? When people get divorced, we're going to accept them anyway. Like, that's wild. That's wild that we have to have this conversation. And so I think people, and Heidi, you kind of hit this. I think a lot of it comes from, and this is maybe shifting into a topic that we don't want to go all the way into tonight, but this is maybe marriage as a conversation for another night. But I have this conversation frequently. Heidi and I have had this conversation about how if you stop and think about all the couples you know who are married, how many of them are happily married? How many of them actually genuinely really like each other? Like really, like if today, if they could walk away from their marriage and not have all the stuff we're talking about, just cleanly, no one would care. Everyone would be like, yeah, good for you. The majority of people probably would. And I think that the idea of someone I think when people within the church and the confines of marriage and how the church views marriage and all that stuff, I think sometimes divorce is such an uncomfortable thing because of a couple things. One, Heidi, this is what you said, it highlights the things where it's like, well, wow, like she left for this reason, but like I'm also experiencing that and I didn't leave, like I stuck it out, so why didn't you? And it becomes a very like, well, you shouldn't have done this because I didn't. Right. And I also think I think there's fear in it. I think that especially with divorce, when you start to sit with that, I mean, imagine someone coming to you and being like, hey, we got divorced, this is why. And you're the person that's like, well, I've done that. Like, so theoretically, like, so then my spouse could be divorced, you know? And so I think there's a lot of discomfort and a lot of fear that surrounds it. Which again goes back to, why are we trying to present our lives as so perfect? Like if these things are a problem, if you're having issues within your marriage, if you're having these problems, instead of putting a, Instagram post about that's 3 paragraphs long about how great they are, maybe go to therapy or like maybe have a date night, and so I think we have, not that will solve everything, but I think that we have these, I think there's a lot of layers to what causes these things that happen that hurt people. And I think one that I always come back to, and this could possibly be because of my current life, but I think one that I always come back to is this intense need to be perfect to the people around, to appear like you have your life together, to appear like everything's holy and proper and you're doing everything right, when in reality that's so far from what the church should be, from what Christians should be. Like we should be transparent about our issues, about our struggles, about the fact that you know what, I'm not Jesus, so I'm not perfect. Like there are things that are not perfect, and that's okay. And by saying that's okay, that doesn't mean I'm condoning sin. That simply means that I am acknowledging the fact that you and we are both human.
Well, that concludes part 1. She kind of gets cut off here in the first part of this, and she's getting on a roll. But I was in charge of the technical part of this, and I messed it up. So we paused it.
I put my phone on just straight voicemail, so I couldn't help out on the fly.
Yeah.
No.
But thank you to Heidi and to Deandra for joining me and helping me with this interview. This concludes part 1, and we're going to come back next week with part 2. So join us next week as we come back and we continue this story with Deandra.